Good day. Thanks for joining us. This is Jason with Net.Academy /LA Networks. Today we're going to do a live demo. We're going to go through and create things like VPCs, subnets, routing tables, and we'll take a look at security constructs like network ACLs or NACLs and security groups. You can see probably from my screen, I've already created some of this. I actually lost my original intro, so I had to re-record it, but we'll still go through the full demo from stage 1 to stage N. If you have any questions, please put them down in the chat below, and I'll do my best to get back to you. We appreciate any comments you could give us. Also, if you're enjoying the content or you're getting any value out of this, perhaps give us a thumbs up and a subscription. If you'd like to be notified when we post new content, just go ahead and click the bell icon. Thank you so much. And with that said, let's dive in and create a VPC. Okay, here we are in the VPC dashboard. It's a pretty blank canvas at this point. In fact, it's so blank, I've already deleted the default VPC, as I mentioned I like to do. Let's go ahead and click the Create VPC button. I would recommend when you're first starting out that you'll leave the VPC only checked. In fact, I never use this VPC and more. If you wanted to do more than one thing at a step, you might want to look at some kind of automated solution like CloudFormation templates or Terraform or something along those lines. So I just leave this here. The name is optional. The name tag is what's known as a key value pair. If you know what that is, it's self-explanatory. If you don't, it's not going to factor much into these early sessions. So I would recommend you do name all of your objects just for ease of console friendliness. So we'll call this, for example, US West 2 Dev VPC. Now, I recommend that in your environment, you come up with a name standard and then adhere to it, and it should make sense to you and your environment. This is just as an example. I wouldn't necessarily recommend you name something with the region tagged into it, but it makes it simple for this. And then we need an IPv4 CIDR. So I'll use 10.1.0.0/24 in this case. And that's literally all that we need. I hit Create VPC. And there it is. Our VPC is created. Okay, next we're going to create some subnets. We've already got our VPC created. You'll see there's no subnets in here, so let's go ahead and create a couple of subnets. So you're going to select a VPC. This is one of the reasons I like to delete the default VPC. There's multiple reasons, but this is one of them. That default VPC can lead to confusion a lot of times with your users or clients because they're just going to click the down arrow, select the VPC. They see two of them. They don't know which one to grab. This way, it's very simple. Again, we're going to go ahead and name our objects today. So we'll call this US West 2 dash, I don't know, sub 1 for subnet 1, right? Maybe we'll keep the dev theme, dev dash sub 1. Now, availability zone. This will be a little confusing, but you'll get used to it really quick. Trust me. If you saw my video on subnets and availability zones, this might already be known to you, but you have two concepts. You have the AZ, which in this case would be like 2A, 2B, 2C, 2D. And then you have the actual availability zone itself. In this case, US 2A, US West 2A goes to US AZ2. 2B goes to AZ1, 2C to AZ3, and 2D to AZ4. Your important part here is to realize that the ABCD is randomized per account when you're creating these. The 1, 2, 3, 4 is absolute. It doesn't change over time. Your big goal is to usually set up things in separate availability zones so that we have more resiliency. So I'll put this one in 2A. Maybe that would mean I would want to come up here and change this to 2A because the subnet is an AZ wide construct, right? And then I need to pick a subnet out of this block. So I could do something like 10.1.0.0/25, for example. Let's go ahead and create a second subnet. We'll call this one sub2. And again, the important part is we're selecting different AZs. I'll pick the AZ1 this time. And we'll pick the other half of that /25, right? We'll go ahead and create the subnet. Oh, sorry, I've got a typo there. Let's try that again. Okay, there are my two subnets, okay? Next thing we're going to be looking at is route tables. Now, when it comes to route tables, you'll note that there is a route table already created here. It's the main routing table. As we've talked about before, that's created at VPC instantiation, right? And we're going to just go ahead and leave it as is. So let's go ahead and create a new route table. Now, a route table, you're going to see right away, my naming standard might get a little sloppy here because while I know my region, a route table could either be tagged to all the all the availability zones in a region, or all the subnets in a region, or to a specific subnet or availability zone, right? So would I do US West 2 or would I do US West 2A? It doesn't matter in this case, right? Because we're just doing this as kind of like a demo. But this is why I'm a big fan of get your hands on the console whenever you can, set up a free tier account, and start working through this because it gets you thinking about these kinds of challenges, right? Let's go ahead and now do, so remember the main routing table, anything not explicit, any subnet not explicitly associated with a route table is implicitly associated with the main routing table. And that's why we don't use the main routing table. So let's explicitly add our subnets into this routing table. Okay. And we will go ahead and look at how to add a route. We're not going to add a route right now because I don't have any gateway objects. But for example, if I was going to add a default route, right? Here are all the things I could point it to. Now, probably the most common things you would point it to, especially a default route, would be an internet gateway or a net gateway or a network interface if you had a network appliance like a firewall or something in line. You could point it to a transit gateway or a virtual private gateway as well. We will talk about a lot, if not all, of these gateway objects in future sessions. But you can see how, if you're a traditional network engineer, usually your next hop is an IP address. In any cloud, really, your next hop for a static route is going to be some kind of object, right? And then you would refer to that object. We don't have such an object, so I'm going to just cancel out. And now our route table's completed. So the next thing we'll take a look at are some of the security items that we talked about before. So we have NACLs, and NACLs and security groups for that matter are both, again, created at VPC instantiation. You can see it says default is yes. That means it is the default NACL, right? And let's take a look at this. Okay. It's basically saying, hey, I have an inbound rule of allow all, right? But that rule number is 100. So I could do up to 99 rules that would take effect before this. I'm going to have a similar one for my outbound rules. Again, default allow all on rule 100. you'll note that there's an unnumbered rule for both in and out of deny. So basically anything not explicitly allowed is implicitly denied. This will tell you the two subnets that are already associated with this because they're in the VPC, right? We're not going to use an ACL, but we will use a security group. Now, there is also a default security group, which is created at VPC instantiation. And you'll see that basically it has a default rule that says, if you're already in the security group, you can talk to anything in the security group. That's kind of what it does. Again, I don't use much in the way of default objects, so let's create a new security group. Maybe we'll call it now. I want you to know, in this case, it says security group name. That's not the same as a name tag. So for security groups, I actually like to add my own tag, capital N name, and I make the name tag equal the security group name. You'll see how this looks in a moment when we pop out, right? So maybe I'll give it a name or a description like default SG or dev in US West 2. And then the security group is always tagged into a VPC. We're going to add an inbound rule, and maybe we would say something like, well, I want ICMP v4, but only if it's sourced from a private. I could give that rule a description. And maybe I also want to allow SSH. Again, maybe I only want to do that, though, if it's coming from a private address. Now, these descriptions could be anything. They could be maybe on your base security group, like what we're creating right now. They would be similar to this. But you can have more than one security group attached to any particular object, right? They attach basically to ENIs, which are like VNICs. So they only allow permits or allows, but you can put multiple security groups. So maybe you have a base one that just says, well, allow ping and SSH, or maybe you're a Windows shop. Maybe it allows ping and RDP or something. I'm not sure. But then maybe you have a database one, and the database one also allows, you know, some database ports, 1521 or 1433 or something along those lines, right? Or maybe you have a web server that needs to be open to the internet. It might allow ADM 443, but instead of from a private address, it might allow it from anywhere on the internet, right? Or maybe you have an internal web server and it also allows ADM 443, but again, only from the perspective of the 10/8 space or something along those lines. We're going to go ahead and create the security group now. And if I come back out, you will see here's where that name came in. That's the name tag I added. This is the security group name field that I mentioned, right? And then when you click into it itself, then you can see the rules and their specific descriptions. So we're close to wrapping up now. I wanted to come back and touch on one thing in VPCs. And that is, I mentioned before in VPCs, we can add additional CIDR blocks. To do so, you just edit the CIDRs and you would add a new IPv4 CIDR. So I could add like 10.1.1.0/24, for example. Right? And now I have 10.1.0.0/24 and 10.1.1.0/24. Now, if you're a traditional network engineer, this might drive you a little nuts because you would like to merge those into 10.1.0.0/23. And other clouds like like Azure or GCP might allow you to do something like that. But AWS is a little more old school. Once you create a CIDR block, it's more or less immutable. You can't really change it. Same thing when you create a subnet object, it's more or less immutable. You cannot change it, right? You can add to it, like I said here. You could delete it if you wanted to, right? But you cannot modify it. You can basically just create new CIDR blocks or delete existing CIDR blocks. But you'll note I can't remove the default CIDR block, right? Just the new one I created. If I close this, now I have 2 CIDR blocks in here, right? And I could then come back and create 2 more subnets if I wanted. We're not going to go through everything and then associate it with a route table, but just understand adding the CIDR block does create downstream work, right? Once you add the CIDR block, you then need to make sure you create subnets, that they're created in the appropriate availability zones. Maybe that's the same availability zones. Maybe that's 2 new availability zones. And then you need to explicitly associate those subnets with a route table, right? Hopefully that made sense. But as always, if you have questions, please put them in the comments below. And I look forward to start diving into gateway objects next.